This is why D&D is good, actually, and you're just being mean. OD&D, original D&D, was released in 1974, but it wasn't even a complete game at that point. It was a framing device that you would utilize to build dungeons, to run games. The actual combat was handled by chainmail, which was a different game developed by Gary Gygax and this guy named Jeff Perrin, who eventually left before D&D began. I think Jeff joined the army. So Gary Gygax teamed up with Dave Arneson, used chainmail for the combat system. They used this other game by Avalon Hill called Outdoor Survival to track how you would go from the city to the dungeon. So you would start in a town using Outdoor Survival. You would travel over to the dungeon. In the dungeon, you would utilize chainmail to fight all the monsters, get all the loot. You would grab everything in here, and then using Outdoor Survival again to get home, you would then head back to town, and then that's like your adventure, that's your session, that's your whatever. D&D began as a narrative framework for linking together war games. Who here didn't know that D&D started as a war game? That's actually why adventures are called campaigns, because of Napoleonic wargaming. You control entire armies. You would fight someone else like 40K style. Generally, there would be someone called a referee who would be an impartial adjudicator to ensure that all the rules go smoothly, which would then become the dungeon master. This shifted from you're controlling an entire army to you're controlling a single unit, a single character. That's also why hit points are utilized to measure health. In original wargaming, hit points was a determination of how many hits can your army take before you lose all of your soldiers. Each soldier was 1 hit point. In ship combat, you would have like ironclads that were firing at each other. And if you had 8 hit points, this would mean that your ironclad could take 8 shells, be hit 8 times before it went down. Because if you think about that, a ship is good, it's good, it's good, it's good, and then it takes 1 fatal breach and then it's sunk. That's how ships work. That is not how people work, which is why everyone who says that hit points are dumb is kind of right, because they're not really conducive to controlling a single individual. The original D&D designers came from wargaming. They came from ship v ship combat. They came from Napoleonic campaigns. So they took all of those lessons they learned from war games and applied it to D&D. The referee would become the dungeon master because the game Dungeons and Dragons expected you took place in a dungeon, explicitly a dungeon. It could be some other form of structure. It doesn't have to be literally like a place where people were imprisoned, but the idea being is that if you're a DM, if you're a referee turned DM, you would make a specific dungeon that was basically the modern conception of a mega dungeon, because the game was intended as a hex crawl, dungeon crawl hybrid with outdoor survival. You'd utilize chainmail for the combat, and experience was literally based off your gold. Who here knew in the early editions of the game, you actually had different experience scaling based off what class you were? Fun little fact, this has a lot of mini games in it. Does anyone here know the original 3 classes of OD&D? I will give you a hint. They have modern incarnations presently that have been adapted from them, but they have weird names, or 2 of them have weird names. There are 3 classes, and I'll give you the easy one. The easy one is a cleric. Okay, so magic user, thief, elf, that came in Greyhawk was the thief, and I believe in AD&D was the elf. Magic user was one of them. Fighting man, that is correct. So when you played OD&D, you played as a cleric, a magic user, and a fighting man. And effectively, the fighting man was your fighter, as you would expect. The magic user was your wizard. And the cleric, oddly enough, was a little bit like a paladin. It really was your modern conception of a cleric, but wizards, magic users, got a single spell at first level. Clerics got no spells at first level. Clerics were closer to a half-caster in their first incarnation than anything else, because the ethos was, so if you want to play a magic user or a fighting man, the only thing in the center initially was the cleric. You had a sliding scale of casters a little bit. It was more like you had a binary of fighting man and you had a magic user. And then in the center, the cleric was kind of like a half measure. The cleric wasn't good at either. Some other fun little facts about OD&D is every single weapon did 1d6 damage. And the only rules for what different weapons did was that light weapons, like daggers, you could attack twice. Large weapons, like polearms, you could attack once every other turn. So you're like, okay, why would I ever not just wield a dagger? And that's a good question. You would only ever wield a dagger. The ethos behind that was that in the very beginning of the game, they only had D6s. This was before it became a D20 system. And this is also why you had like your stats where you would roll 3d6 and then start your character. Back to my initial point, in the idea that each dungeon master had their own specific dungeon, the game was a hex crawl, dungeon crawl. Set groups weren't common. Instead, it was closer to a West Marches style of game, which is why Matthew Colville brought that back 10 years ago or whatever in his video. And then it kind of like got a life of its own in the public consciousness. You would show up to your gaming group and there would be like 3 tables active. And maybe last time you played with this DM and you played with this player and this player, but the other players that you played with, one was here and 2 were there. So then you show up and you're like, okay, this one has 6 people. This one has 6 people. This one has 5 people. I guess I'm joining this table today. That's why every single DM had their own dungeon, is because it's the idea is that if you have a big gaming group of like 10 to 20 people, you would not play with the same 3 to 5 other people every single week or every single session. You would float between all of the different groups that were actively playing. So what might end up happening is that you might have a level 5 fighting man. You are like, whoa, I was in a really high magic game with my last GM. I got a +1 sword and a potion of invisibility by level 5. My last DM gave me a +8 dagger. And like, that's an issue that a lot of people would have. But you would just show up and then your DM would have to trust that you're not lying about your +1 sword and potion of invisibility. But also, does that really matter when you're level 5 and there's also a level 8 magic user? That's the kind of questions you got to ask yourself. It's like, what was the line and what was acceptable? I do have a question for you. This is a little mini game. What is this creature? This is from 1st edition D&D. This is from OD&D. I want to see if you can figure out what this creature is, because it has progressed over time. It has evolved in its depictions. This is a creature in its original incarnation. That's right. This is a goblin. Goblin D's nuts. Got him. So back to history. The culture of the game was way different in the 70s and 80s. It was significantly more adversarial than modern play. Remember, this was from wargaming. This was from fledgling DMs at the time were only recently referees. They were only recently war game administrators. There's a lot of talk about how rocks fall, you die. The Temple of Elemental Evil, a lot of these classic dungeons had just like, if you weren't doing this, you died. I want to point out something that I think a lot of people don't actually fully know. So this is the Ring of 3 Wishes. It's from D&D Monsters and Treasures. This is the description of the item. I want to draw your attention to the underline section. So this is like, it's a wish that grants wishes. It's up to the referee how they handle that. Typically, greedy characters will request more wishes, for example, as one of their wishes. The referee should then put that character into an endless closed time loop, moving him back to the first time he obtained the wish ring. Again, a wish for some powerful item could be fulfilled without benefit to the one wishing. I wish for a mirror of life trapping, and the referee then places the character inside, one of which is all his own. This is the ruling for wishes. 2/3 of it is just discussing how to screw with your players, how to twist your players' words, how to upset their plans and ruin what they're saying. And a lot of people think that a wish is like a monkey's paw in modern play, but that's just the entire game in the 70s. That was the entire game in that period of time, and this is just exemplified by the wishes. This is just made most clear in the wishes. In the 70s and 80s, if you were walking down a hallway in a dungeon and you did not explicitly mention you are being quiet, you are checking for traps, you're using a 10-foot pole to tap the floor, tap the ceiling, tap the walls, you're using a mirror to check around corners, the DM assumes you are walking dumb, deaf, and blind, which is just anathema to how the game has progressed and how the relationship between DM and players has evolved. Even having a thief, you weren't assumed to always be looking. You would have to say, I am looking for traps. I am going at half speed so I can be quiet and looking for traps. That sounds so unfun. It sounds incredibly unfun because it was unfun, but the assumption was that everyone is going to get their time where the feet is in the fire. Everyone is going to hit a point where they are being hosed by the DM and the entire party is going to be like, haha, you're getting screwed. But then the schadenfreude you get from that for the rest of the party offsets the negative that the one person has, and it goes around. No one's getting bullied because everyone's getting hosed. So even if you're getting screwed right now, your buddy's going to get screwed in 10 minutes. That was the prevailing design philosophy, which has really fallen out of favor in recent years. Another like quick little mini game. Who is this? I'll give you a hint. It's on the title. This was a character that was very important to AD&D, to second edition, to the development of Dungeons & Dragons history, and actually was responsible for the in-universe explanation. I think it was the shift of AD&D to third edition. Yeah, so this is Vecna, often called like the Archlich. This is often like seen as a minor god of secrets, of magic, one of the villains in like Critical Role. Someone call him the King of Liches. I would almost say a Lich King. Lich King these nuts. Got him? Continuing on with the herstory. In 1977, we eventually got the Dungeons & Dragons basic set. This basically just cleaned up the presentation of OD&D. It wasn't very many rules changes. It was mostly just reformatting, rechanging it, presenting it in a more perceivable manner. But it also brought us AD&D in the same year. And this is where we got into a bit of a cultural divide in the development team, because Basic was more rules light. It was marked towards people who aren't familiar with D&D. It was marketed towards people who maybe were trying to get into this weird thing. Dungeons & Dragons had been around for a couple of years at this point. It was starting to get more popular. They were printed in zines and magazines, mostly in the Midwest and the West Coast, I believe. And then AD&D was more robust. It was marketed as the complete experience. It was marketed towards people who wanted the quote-unquote full D&D experience. And then some boring stuff happened, like AD&D second edition, the company split apart, it was bought by Wizard of the Coast. Now we have Pathfinder, my favorite edition of D&D. And that's the entire history of D&D. Okay, so now I have a question. Who is this? The Joker of Gotham? And this is my biblioteca. Matt Colville, Wikipedia, this one Reddit post that talked about the Ring of Three Wishes. I don't know, I just kind of freestyle it. 1d6 every weapon, like what weapons people use. I got that from Lindy Beige. One more question to this. What is this? I'm going to give you guys one guess to figure out what this is. This is from first edition. I'm curious what you guys are going to say. It's not Goblin Those Nuts. It's not Shrek. It's not your uncle. Nilbog These Nuts. Got him? Obviously it's a Nilbog. What are you talking about? Okay, that's my entire presentation.